welcome Head of Digital Marketing and Analytics, Global Schroders, Julian Brewer.
Wow, it's bright up here. If you've not been up here, try it in the minute, but it's very bright anyway. So many thanks for the introduction. I think this is I was counting back, somebody was telling me this is the 20th Digital Velocity in total. I think I've been to about 5 or 6 of them, so I've been around the block a little bit when it comes to digital velocities. The talk I'm going to give today is is it a sequel? A sequel of what happened last year. So anybody who was here last year, I'm not going to ask for hands, but I'm sure a couple of you out there have seen the talk that I gave last year, which really was taking Schroders, which is, for those of you who don't know, is probably ingrained in your pension scheme somewhere, as an asset manager, as a fund manager, to be able to make you rich enough to be able to retire. Taking an asset manager which was very global, but patchy in the way that it managed its data and the way it managed its websites, and standardizing that globally across 40 different countries in order to be able to get us into a state where even simple things like web analytics could be pulled together and looked at a regional level or a global level or by segment or wherever you did it. So the sequel to what happened last year is this year. And this year we've taken it on just that little bit stage further. We've looked at the way that we pulled all the data together and then started to look at a digital vision, a strategy of where we're going to take Schroders. And Telium sits pretty much at the heart of that because it sits underneath and powers just about everything that we do from a digital perspective. So let me step into it. The strategy, which you saw on the very first slide, which is sparking smarter relationships, is built on 3 key insights that drive the way that we've pulled all of our tech stack together, the way we've started to communicate across all of our digital channels using Telium data. So the first one is that broadly, asset managers will use the insight from the digital ecosystem, hence we're pulling all the data together and making it in a standard format, to drive competitive advantage. And I'll step through these one at a time and show you how Telium is integrated and how it powers what we're doing. The second one is that adding value and efficiency to our processes is absolutely key. You have to imagine that asset managers, in the way that they've used digital, are really probably somewhere in the order of 5 to 10 years behind, for example, retail banks. So the processes, and quite a lot of the processes that we see in a digital space, are relatively manual. Let me give you an analogy and step you back to last year. So when I stepped into Schroders some 2 years ago, our chief marketing officer looked at me. You're a digital guy, you know what you're talking about. Could you let me know how many intermediaries we have accessing our sites in Europe and then globally? This couldn't be easier for somebody to come from a retail bank. I put my hand up and said, that will be easy, I'll get that to you. And it took me 3 months to pull all the information together on spreadsheets, pulling it out of Google Analytics, translating it, combining it, and then putting it into charts. That is now behind us, but there are a lot of other processes that sit within there are really very, very manual. So adding value and efficiency to our processes and the way that we do digital, so looking not only externally, but also looking internally and using that information is really quite important. And the third one, which is the one which excites me quite a lot, is our future relationships need to be powered by the intelligence, by the insight that we generate from digital. This is the core to the thinking behind first-party data. It's how do we use that data and the way that people engage with our sites to be able to populate that data in order to be able to really improve the way that we have our relationships with our clients. And asset managers, B2B marketing, a lot of those relationships are face-to-face or over the phone. So they're a human relationship. So how do we get that intelligence into the hands and make it as powerful as possible to be able to really get those relationships to hum? And actually, number 3 really plays into number 1 as well, because it'll give us a competitive advantage. We'll be able to have a relationship and a far more informed relationship in the way that other asset managers can't have, to be able to step 1-2 years ahead of where the other asset managers are. So let me step through these one at a time and give you an idea of really how we play into them. So the first one, sorry, no, not the first one, just to give you a little of the background. So our digital channels overall stretch across all of these different areas. So here's a really big one. So fund fact sheets, our global fund center, and the way that people access that and then start to download from that fund center is massively important. So we have a lot of engagement in here, and a lot of engagement in here where we bring thought leadership to the party. We drive that through emails. We'll have meetings that could be over Skype, as an example, and web conferences. And at the far end, quite a lot of our events given to you as an email invite. You come, you register, it's on a digital channel and so forth. So a lot of this is digital, although the challenge with it is really quite separate and disparate. And yet the same person might be accessing all of those interactions, and we want to be able to pull that all together. So there's the big challenge, and that's where we got to probably at the end of 2018, is to start to pull all that together. But it is very, very complex and global, and it needs to be segmented, and it's all in local language. We pulled it all together through the CDP, through UDH. So our implementation of UDH started to plug into or feed off of all of those different channels. And we're still in the process as we add various channels on to be able to ensure that Telium's in there, not only our owned channels, but also ones which are provided to us by third parties as well. And we then start to segment, generate insights within this channel, but we also start to stitch. And we stitch in the way that you'd classically see within a CDP, so the cookie is there to be able to pull all that information together. But over and above that, we now start to capture unique identifiers about the individuals in order to be able to use it elsewhere. And although you may not have spotted it, but when you start to look in here on the right-hand side, here you have all the badges of the type of engagement we have. You have some assets that people are starting to access, and that could be not only within a fund class, but also within a insight. So we'll start to classify our insight articles, our thought leadership against various asset classes. So taxonomy is massively important in order to be able to pull this together. So all of these badges, and there are a lot of them, are pulled together because asset managers don't do things in a simple way. And we have lots of different taxonomies and ways of looking at things. But the piece that sits down here is really quite important as well. And this piece in here, so SFID, is the piece, the golden key that allows us to stitch across to other systems. So that's the Salesforce ID. And we'll come on to that a little bit more. But that's use of that Salesforce ID and the collection of it from the email, pulling it down into a place where we can unify it, segment, and generate insight, allows us then to pass that back out to some of our key channels where our relationship with the clients on a face-to-face basis occurs. Let's start outside and start to look at some of the leveraging of what we're trying to do. And you would have probably seen quite a lot of this in the talks yesterday. So this is classic use of dynamic creative outside of the site. So we're starting to look at behavior on the site, pull it all together, segment it, work out what the next best action or the sequencing that we want to use against the different audiences, and pass it back out to, in this case, TrustNet. So TrustNet is a relatively closed, walled garden, if you like. So they don't allow people to actually buy against audiences there. So we're relying on the people that we've known on site, collected that information, going back out to TrustNet and looking at other competitors and some of our products to be able to generate dynamic creative. And I guess for those people who are really, really techie, you're kind of wondering how the hell do we do that one, because it's a closed garden. And it's a closed garden to the extent that you really can't target on it. We've done it in a very neat way. So we've not used classic ad server out there, so we've not used your double clicks in there. We've used a first-party ad service. So the first-party ad service allows us to be able to unify between what's happening externally from the site and the information that's gathered, and neatly stitch that on a one-to-one basis to what's happening on the site, and allows us then to be able to target off the back of that and also receive the information back from what's happening off-site down into us. So essentially TrustNet, and I'm hoping nobody from TrustNet is in the room, TrustNet essentially becomes an extension of our site in a way that DoubleClick wouldn't allow us to do within their marketplace. The second piece is, and this really comes to the heart, you would have seen a lot, as I say, yesterday, of external marketing, possibly personalization. I'm sure you'll hear from team a lot about, how we're going to extend channels externally and allow those to be able to personalize more and more. But the heart of what we're trying to do now within Schroders, as I said at the beginning, is the relationship, and it's taking things internally. So how do we get this data and really start to make it breathe down into the human elements of what happens within Schroders? So thinking back to the original story that I gave about Google Analytics, this is our plug for the integration between Telium and Tableau. So that data access connector that sits between the two allows us to get a very, very rich set of information and pass it down into Tableau. And we've created a number of these views within here and passed it out to some of the really key areas that start to have clunky process that we can improve. So in this case, it's gone to a content creator, and the content creator sits centrally and is really important to be able to generate their view on Brexit, their view on European equities, private assets and the like, and allows them to slice and dice to their heart's content and start to allow them to compare what they've got compared to this person who sits to the left or to the right and that's also creating articles. So there's a competition coming as a result of this. And there's a little video that I put in here just to show you the sort of functionality, the rich functionality that we have in here. I'm hoping it'll work. Here we go. Okay, so region and client channel is all brought in from Telium. The user can slice and dice that to their heart's content. And then obviously they can use that to be able to split out unique page views or sessions and drive the overall metrics that sit in here and compare them and send them out to their stakeholders. They get a view over time. They can then take all the tagging that we have on the site and the way that we've used the taxonomy to be able to see how that works and how things are changing against the selections that they made at the top. They can look at week-on-week change. They can look at content categories. And we use that to be able to slice and dice and explore what's happening to the content they put on the site. And then a different type of taxonomy, they also have the ability to be able to take the post topics. So when somebody creates an article, they put somewhere around about 4 or 5 different post topics onto the site. They can see how they're starting to work. And then finally, they can get down to the individual articles. And actually on the far right-hand side, you would have seen at the top another tab. They can explore those individually. And then they can look at the sources of the traffic if they're using bought media to be able to drive it. And a lot of you will be sitting there going, well, isn't that what Google Analytics does? Well, yes, it does. But it doesn't give you the flexibility to put all of that in the hands of somebody, delivered into their inbox as an email, as a PDF, that they can click through and then investigate on a daily, if you want, basis. So the content creators are really, really happy, and they're starting to change their behavior about how they create content on the basis of the insight that we've given to them in a readily usable format. Their processes are improved. So that's one use of the data that we've got in. And you've got to remember at this point, all the data that's landing in a content creator's inbox is exactly the same as we're using to be able to power stuff externally on TrustNet. So there's a continuum. It's a single source of data all the way through. There are another set of stakeholders that we have internally, and those stakeholders are the very senior guys that sit around our board, and they're starting to really get interested in digital as well. So we've taken the same set of data that we've normalized and we've structured in a way to understand what sessions are and so forth. We've not only passed it to Tableau, we've also passed it to an in-house app that sits on their tablets and sits on their mobile phones. And this is that. So it gives a much higher level view. In here you have our Chief Marketing Officer, who's up there. And the board level insights overview and the Tableau view that goes down to content creators or local marketeers is exactly the same. And trust me, that's massively important. So when these guys ask a question and trying to find out what's happening in APAC, and they have a set of figures in here, and they say what's happening over there, we need to be able to investigate it in a format that uses exactly the same data, so we're not talking chalk and cheese. So it's a common source of data, and insight providing a consistent message. It reduces the noise because everybody's talking the same language, and there's very little rework. So that's number 2. And then the third one, the one which really is at the core of the strategy we've got. So our strategy overall is sparking smarter, relationships, starting to use the data to be able to improve the relationships in the digital channels and then down in the human channels as well. So we then start to take the data and pass it across to our sales teams. These are the guys that have the majority of the communications, the majority of the interactions with the people throughout an organization. We have the Salesforce ID, so we pass that information to and from so that sales get the information that they're interested in. They have a common identifier when we pass it across in the Salesforce ID and the Telium ID. Any interaction they have in there, they can like or dislike. Was the information we were giving to you good? If it's good, we can pass it back and we can take it into our ecosystem, our data ecosystem, if you like, and improve it. If it's down and they didn't like it, we can start to change it and not give them as much as that. So we then start to stitch it together. So the type of information we're passing across to them is the UK website, the email information that we're putting to them, event attendance, because they're logging in. And then that links all the way through on the basis of the investments that they've got down into Salesforce. And at the moment, it's relatively crude. So the information we're passing across lands at the contact record. A contact record is simply a record of an individual that sits within an organization that we have a relationship with because they have a single Salesforce ID, which is common to their email address. It lands within the contact record that sits in here, and we start to deliver that information down into them in here. So they are UK institutional. We're passing that across from the website. Here are all the badges that they picked up, and there's some information which I really should have, from GDPR purposes, probably blocked out for you, so I'll take that away. So we're passing all that information across, and we're starting to get a feedback from the Salesforce teams about whether they find that interesting or not. The Tableau records that we start to put together will very soon start to be able to split out that information for the sales teams to have, so they got that as well. And the combination of the two allows them to have a much better conversation with the people they are on the phone to or about to meet in a face-to-face meeting. But I'm not happy with it quite that far. So this is a relatively crude integration. So Telium passes it up into our account-based marketing tool, Pardot, and Pardot links it across into Salesforce. It works, it's neat, the sales teams like it, but I want to take it that little bit further, because if you find something in here that is really rich, I want to understand how it's going to be used. Is there a task, is there an action, is there a process off the back of that? So the following stage is then to take all of this information and start to embed it in process. And we are probably no more than 3 months away from integrating all the information that we've got into rich graphical information rather than a bottom right-hand corner type of information that sits on the contact record. Rich information based on trends that we see within there, machine learning, down into the tasks within Salesforce. That's really, really, really interesting. And the reason it's interesting is because I can start to look at changes in behavior. I can start to look alike between one set of behavior and another and start to look at anomalies and pass those deep into the tasks and the processes that a sales or a service team need to action on a daily basis. It requires a lot of trust between the marketing team and the sales team, which, trust me, is difficult to get within a B2B organization. But if we get the first piece right and they start to understand and like the information we're giving to them, the next bit about passing into their processes starts to become really, really important. So this information with machine learning, I think you're going to hear probably a little bit more about that later on today, passed into Salesforce, and then the feedback loop is the place that we're very, very nearly at. And I think, I don't know, but I think we're one of the first people to do it between Telium and Salesforce. So with that, I think we'll get very close to sparking smarter relationships, but with that equally, I end my conversation. Thank you.